Now, I'm joined by Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent, before I get back to your calls on policing and arrests in particular, because Donald Trump has signed a ban on travel to the US for citizens from 12 countries in what he says is a bid to protect Americans from dangerous foreign actors. Simon, we've sort of been here before, haven't we, first time around?
Yeah, we have very much been here before, Shelagh, back in January of 2017, when you will remember that on the evening after, Theresa May had made her first visit to Donald Trump's White House. Donald Trump surprised her by suddenly announcing his Muslim travel ban, which was a ban on all travellers from 7 predominantly Muslim populated countries. That then succumbed to a whole variety of legal challenges. So this is basically an attempt by Donald Trump to reheat all of that. He has been planning to do this from the moment that he returned to the White House. And I think the timing of this announcement last night was not coincidental. It came as part of a flurry of proclamations that the president suddenly signed in what I think was really a distraction technique. It was aimed to change the national conversation that yesterday was dominated by Elon Musk's decision to break with Donald Trump, at least as far as his massive tax and spending bill is concerned. So this is President Trump hoping that through the countries that he has selected for this particular ban, and they are Afghanistan, Myanmar, Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan and Yemen, that he's taken some steps that will give this particular version of the travel ban a greater chance to withstand legal challenges. Legal challenges are absolutely sure to follow. The American Immigration Council already saying this is going to do absolutely nothing to make Americans safer and is only going to make it harder for people who are legally entitled to enter the United States to do so. But what I think he was principally doing over the last few hours through this proclamation and a host of others was an effort really at distraction to try and change the national conversation.
And speaking of the national conversation, he has spoken many times, hasn't he, about NATO and spending by Europe. His Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, I can never say that man's name, Hegseth, he is talking of there being a consensus in Europe now. Is he listening to the same Europe we are?
I mean, it's completely wishful thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Pete Hegseth engaged in a fair amount of wishful thinking last weekend in Singapore at the annual Asian Security Conference known as the Shangri-La Dialogue. And he was confronted there by officials from the European Union and indeed by one representative of the British government who basically pushed back at his suggestion that the United States had no role really that it wanted to play in terms of European security, but equally it didn't want the Europeans involved in security in the Indo-Pacific region, which the United States now sees through Donald Trump as its particular preserve. Now Pete Hegseth agreeing, well, there's broad consensus that Donald Trump was absolutely right when he upped the ante and said that America's NATO allies and other European nations needed to devote 5% of their GDP to defence, not the 2.5% that he had previously demanded. I mean, we know from the events of this week that our own Prime Minister is not even ready to stipulate as to when the UK will devote 3% of its GDP to defence. So the idea that there is consensus around this within NATO is wishful thinking and possibly an argument that Pete Hegseth is advancing for an audience of one, namely his boss back there at the White House.
And speaking of his boss at the White House, he has been on the phone with President Xi of China, I'm told.
Yeah, 2 major world leaders in 2 days. Vladimir Putin yesterday, President Xi Jinping today, and neither conversation was included in the published schedule for President Donald Trump, so both have taken us a bit by surprise. There's been a need for President Trump and President Xi to speak for weeks, and there's been a delicate ballet leading up to this conversation because the Americans said that President Trump would only hold a conversation conversation about his trade war on China with President Xi if President Xi requested the discussion. And the Chinese sat on their hands for several weeks and made the Americans sweat about it. We don't precisely know the mechanics that led up to this conversation, and there's nothing yet from Donald Trump or from the Chinese side offering any indication as to whether they reached any kind of an agreement further to alleviate the tariffs on China that Donald Trump has put into place. He's also, of course, partially walked some of them back, which is why on Wall Street there's this new moniker attaching itself to Donald Trump, Taco. Trump always chickens out. That's something the White House has furiously pushed back against. But there's always, of course,
nice Mexican
the concern.
tinge to it, yeah.
Exactly. Well, there's that. But also there's sort of the Back to the Future concern that, you know, when Marty McFly in Back to the Future was accused of being chicken, you know, he redoubled his efforts to prove that he wasn't a chicken. Maybe Donald Trump's going to do the same in this conversation that's taken place with President Xi. I'm sure we'll find out in a few hours.
Let's find out. Thanks very much indeed, Simon. Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent.